Hello and welcome again to Oscar Mike Radio. I'm Travis, the host. Oscar Mike Radio is about the military and our veterans, active duty service members, the people that support them, and everything in between. Thank you again for watching. And I want to say thank you again to Susan Hunter, who was just on a short time ago to talk about her book, 77 Letters, and we're kind of doing part two and some other things. Susan, welcome back. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me back.
This was a really amazing book. And Susan, I've had several people watch our show, listen to our show and said, wow, usually, it's all military stuff and slang and guys talking, but this was a really impactful story because it's such a different viewpoint. And so there was so much to cover. We couldn't do it all in one show. And so I'm happy that you're here. How's it going?
It's going well, thank you. This continues to affect people. I continue to get emails, and I think when people read it, they feel compelled to help out. So I've been on other podcasts, none as great as this one though.
Flattery gets you everywhere.
It's really doing its job. It's really touching people's hearts. And one of the things that we've said from the beginning is you need to change hearts in order to change behaviors. And this is definitely touching people's hearts.
Another topic from the time, but what if you don't have a heart? What if you don't believe that there's a heart? Just curious.
I would be happy to hop on that one because I have some thoughts on that.
Oh God, Danielle, I'm done now. Well, that's a different. Anyway, moving forward, it's just a little funny thing. Speaking of heart, I stopped right as what I would call, Susan, the heart of the book. Speaking of heart, we stopped where I felt the real heart of the book started to come to the fore. And what I mean by that is all through the book, about a third of the way, they start talking about meeting. And it was talked about. And then they finally meet. And there was a whole lot of things that not only your mother had to get right in her mind and heart before this happened, but your dad had to, your brothers and sisters had to. And they knew that once Bob, who was a Black, unattached, unmarried man, came to Scituate, Massachusetts, some people would look at your family differently. How did you feel about that when you started getting into that part of your mom's journey?
It was very interesting. And just to back it up a little bit, the reason why my mom had to come to grips with some things is he had talked about coming to visit a year and a half prior to the actual visit. And he had kind of built her up that he was coming to visit, and she was excited, and he didn't show. And then she didn't hear from him for months.
I was going to get into that, but yes.
She thought the worst. And so she was a wreck. And she even wrote to the Department of Defense, basically explaining, I'm not, next of kin, I'm not even family. How will I ever know if something happened to him? But please let me know. And so she went through, and then of course they couldn't answer her because she wasn't family. And so she just waited. And then he reappeared, 7 months later. And so she was kind of, as a female, like, what? How could you just be MIA for all this time? And then she had to kind of recheck herself and say, wait a minute, he is fighting a war right now. And anyway, so she had to let that go, let her own closeness and involvement go to the wayside, and she had to remain there for Bob. And so she did for the next year. And then Harry was coming again. And so she was now managing her expectations. Okay, are you actually going to come this time? Because I don't want to let the kids down. And so what she did is she kind of prepared, my dad's thing is prepare for the worst, but hope for the best. So that's kind of what she did. And she didn't tell the kids, but my mom and my father prepared for his coming. And she waited, and he was a little bit late, which is very unmilitary-like. But I think it was probably just for the drama. But anyway, so they did come, and yeah, it's a big deal. I mean, think of it. My mom had that big heart. So, okay, it's easy for her to be like, yeah, well, next time you're on stateside leave, come visit. But put yourself in my dad's shoes. Here's his wife writing to all these men soldiers no less. And now one of them's coming to visit, and from a war, and from a controversial war at that time. And he's black, and she's white, and this was back in the 60s. So there was a lot there that I was like, wow, this is really impressive.
That's what I'm saying. And there was a lot to unpack. Although and I was going to get into this, where your mom was not exactly happy that Bob wasn't writing back, and there was a war going on. I kind of chuckled because even when I started, I wasn't in combat. I'd like, hey, Mom, I'm going to the desert for 2 weeks. I'll see you later. Those were not good thoughts. That was not the right thing to say to, yeah, it must be a female thing. I didn't even think about it. But
Yeah.
Bob brought his A game, because when he showed up, he brought gifts, and not just gifts from Logan Airport, like gifts from across the world. That
From
must have been,
Vietnam.
yeah.
Yeah, he did.
What did your brothers and sisters keep any of that? Because they were very unique. No,
I know. Unfortunately, none
yeah,
of them were saved. But the memories are there.
yeah.
So,
So I mean, just curious. Did you ever talk to your brothers and sisters about, what, do they remember that, or how did they feel when they got that?
well, no, that would have been a good question. I have not asked them how they felt. And they were
Right.
also, yeah, oh no,
Yeah.
5
Okay.
and
All right.
6
All right.
at the time, but they do remember. They do remember their jackets. Um, they do remember their jackets, and they used to play. I mean, back then, kids did play army, and you ran around with the guns, and you had to.
Actually, outside.
Sorry.
Wow. They actually played outside.
And they played, yeah, and they played outside, and they used their imagination, and yeah,
Wow.
I know, utopia.
But the book really built up to this, and then when he was there, there was, he still felt as he was kind of a stranger in a strange land when they went to Plymouth Plantation, and when they went to Plymouth Rock, which it's a really exciting thing to see Plymouth Rock, right, Susan?
Yeah, that was a big buzzkill.
Well, I mean, I saw it for the first time, and I'm like, this, okay. Anyway,
What else?
checked it off the list.
Right. The Chevy Chase. Yeah. Okay, we saw it. Let's move.
But he's doing all this, and he's seeing part of your family. And I think one of the things that stood out for me was the fact that he took it all with grace. And you could tell that your father was really happy that he went to the high school to talk to the kids there, the young men and women who were on the sports teams. And it sounded like, I was going to ask you this, that they asked very insightful questions as young people, and Bob really took the time to answer those questions and really kind of tell them in real world how things were, and it left an impression on your parents.
Yeah, no, he was, I think he got a lot out of the trip, but also in hearing about it, I got a lot. It spoke volumes for him and his character, even outside of the letters that he's written. One thing was he did go to practice with my dad, and the boys, I mean, think of it, they were 16, 17, sophomore, junior, seniors. Um, they were the next sea of conscripts. So, I'm sure they had trepidation in their questions because they were likely being shipped off that next year or what have you. So they asked questions, and one in particular, was a pretty tough one because it's a Catholic school. Boston College High School is a Catholic school, and so it's good and evil, and war is tough, and so he answers it gracefully. And he does, that he understands where they're coming from. He doesn't get offended by it. And he answers it again, kind of with the pillar of faith. Like, he's a very spiritual man. And so he stayed true to that, true north of his, and he answers the questions. And I think the boys appreciated, even just seeing him there. The boys appreciated, my dad certainly appreciated it. And then on the other side, when he went to the Plymouth Plantation with my mom, and they had that kind of that tense encounter with the woman at the register, what I got out of that was, aside from the fact that the woman at the register was kind of ignoring them, and you don't ever really know, was she ignoring them because he's a soldier, Or was she ignoring them because they were a mixed race, or was she ignoring them because he's black? You don't really know. And but what you do see is my mom had just never experienced anybody ignoring her. So she had this very sheltered life where she's never been, say, disrespected like that. And so Bob recognizes this and just steps right in and doesn't even bring it to her awareness that, oh, I can't believe she's ignoring us. Just kind of steps right in and takes over and commands that presence so that the woman does answer, and give them the ticket. Or actually, she gave them a free pass, because he was military. But I thought that was kind of interesting. Aside from the obvious, being ignored, the fact that Joan, my mom, just had never experienced that. So she was oblivious to why didn't she answer me? What was that all about?
It was a very conflicting time because it was so new to her. And I really appreciated the grace that he handled that. He
Yeah.
didn't let it spoil the entire moment, but by him doing that, she got to see how his life was in a lot of areas. And I thought it was very key. But I was like, yes, they got to meet, and it seemed like a really positive experience for your brothers and sisters. You were quite young at the time, I believe.
Yeah, 1.5.
1.5, right?
Yeah.
But that was pretty cool. And then I really, again, liked the time he spent with the young people. And yeah, I mean, for me, I forget that these guys are going to be drafted in 18 months, whether they want to or not.
Right.
It's a different time than it is now.
Right, right. One of the things I did like about that story of them going to Plymouth Plantation is, so Bob, he carried me. I was 18 months old, so he carried me around. So it was my mom, Bob, and me in his arms, and they walked about with no cares in the world or no issues or whatever. And I thought that was beautiful because of the time that was not the norm. But it didn't even phase, certainly didn't phase my mom, and I'm sure it didn't phase Bob. And I don't know what his reaction was. I didn't ask him, or he didn't remember exactly what, any reactions from people at the time. But I just thought that was beautiful. And like, I would love if we could all be that way now. If that's the way they were even back then, let's all be that way now. Like,
Absolutely, absolutely. Leading up to that as well, the other thing that he really communicates with your mother about is the aspect of interracial relationships.
mm-hmm.
And your mom was respectful, but she's like, I don't see it as a positive thing. And she wasn't, I don't say there was any kind of disrespect there or anything. It was just very new and alien to her. And I didn't know how you felt about that.
Well, some of the things, when I was reading the letters, some of the things were hard for me to swallow because we're so evolved now. And I've led a life, or I've had this life where I really haven't been exposed to it. And so reading some of her letters was hard for me to swallow. And that was one of them, when she was just like, oh, she was against it. She's like, and it wasn't against, she didn't have a prejudice bone in her body. It wasn't against black and white loving each other. It was, I fear for that first generation of children born to a mixed marriage where they won't be accepted from the whites or the blacks, or whatever mix it is. They wouldn't be accepted by either race. And she goes, I just fear for them that their life is going to be very difficult. And that's kind of where she came from. But she does say, Bob, I'm not a pioneer. I don't have that grit. Obviously that would be a great end game, and I'd love to get there, but I just don't have that grit, to be that person. Not saying that he was, courting her to be that person, but just even conceptually speaking. So that was a little bit tough for me to read, between the two of them. But I get it. It was back in the time. I have to, put myself back in that time and how things were. And then, there were some other things, like in one letter, she says, oh, Bob, you're pretty happy to know that the networks are now dedicating 5 hours a week to educating the white folks about the Black community. And when I read that, I was like, what? Like, we have to be educated? And it just really it was something far more powerful than anything I've read in a history book in school. This was a letter actually from people living it at that time. And that to me was eye-opening, that that's how far back we were. Um, and as much as disturbing as that was, I also said, okay, well, you know what? Look how far we've come since then. If that's where we were in my same lifetime, that's where we were, then we've come a long way. But it was hard for me to read that from her. And then, yeah, there's a few other things that were hard for me because, again, that's so far in the back that really wasn't even in my lifetime, because by the time I was cognitive of what was going on, we had already moved past that. But yeah, so some of it was difficult for me to hear coming out of my mom's mouth, or, her writing.
So speaking of the interracial aspect, it also came to the aspect of children. And one of the things that really stood out for me, because I'm mixed. I'm not half black, half white, but I am mixed, and it raised questions growing up, and it raises questions now, was the treatment of mixed children in Korea.
Mhm.
And at first I thought Bob was being, exaggerating when he said this, but the aspect that the Koreans used to take half black and half black, half white and Korean babies and feed them to tigers as a mercy killing really brought a lot of this conversation into focus. And I wondered, is that why, he got married to a Korean woman, but is that one of the reasons he wanted to adopt Melody, or where did that come from?
Yeah, I mean, that is true about the mercy killings, which is just amazing. I mean, the fact that they even call it mercy killing, that they're saying kill them at birth as opposed to, the life that we're going to provide for them. And that's kind of exactly what my mom was saying. To back up a little bit, she feared for that the children of mixed, because they wouldn't be accepted by either. And that's a perfect example. Now, over in Korea, that's pretty egregious how they would handle it. But it was the deal, and I think if I recall correctly, the term they use is twiggly, for a mixed baby. I think that's what it was.
I think so, yes.
Yeah, and so yeah, that was a real thing. And so when Bob and Pak Sun, and I absolutely believe he fell in love with Pak Sun. And it's a beautiful love story, and they're still married today. So it's beautiful. I'm sure, just like every marriage, it has, bumpy roads, just like every marriage. But I do believe that was true love. It had nothing to do with trying to prove something, like he did in Germany when he was saying, "Oh, well, maybe I was going to marry a German just to prove that we could have a mixed relationship." But anyway, so he fell in love with Pak Sun, and then when they decided to adopt two children, that's when they said, "Okay, well, we're going to get mixed. We're going to adopt two mixed race." And then from the story how he came upon Melody, which is not a normal adoption. It was just a beautiful thing. It was meant to happen. And so it was a no-brainer. She was half black, half Korean, or is half black, half Korean. And he adopted her, brought her to the States, and she's been able to have an education and basically have a life of an American.
Well, one of the things that got me really curious, and I started reading this, I started thinking, there was a lot of, because, I'm adopted myself, there's a lot of unknowns, a lot of gaps you're trying to fill as you move through life. When she got the letters, I was struck by how you articulated that the letters started filling in blocks that she didn't know about, and how she was able to do that, and how you all developed your own relationship. And I really kind of wanted to see if you'd go into that for me, please.
Yeah, sure. And this will be a little bit behind the scenes exclusives for your listeners. So in the book, obviously you see the redemption. You see her realizing through these letters that her dad was the victim in all this, and it really humanized her father and kind of took the warrior away from the war. And she understood his PTSD a little bit more. She understood. And so that's evident, and that's touched upon in the book. What came after the book, from some of these podcasts and some of these conversations that the two of us have had since then, is through these letters, she actually got some insight and learned about her grandmother, Bob's mother, and her own mother that she didn't never knew before. And it was enough enlightenment that she viewed both of them a little bit differently than she had prior to knowing about the letters. And one such example is in the story, in the book, there's that story of Bob telling my mother about his own mom, who was a single mom, 7 children. So, she's, exhausted all the time, 7 children, and holding down probably 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet. And she goes outside and sees a white woman with some children freezing in a car, starving and freezing in a car in the alley. She welcomes them in, and she, bathes the kids, and she feeds them for a couple days while the husband of this woman who was out in the car is out looking for a job. They were from Texas. And so that's a beautiful story. And Melody had never heard stories like that about her grandmother. And so it was healing for her in that regard too, to see where, okay, this is how my grandmother, was back then. She had it difficult, and yet she still had this beautiful heart, to extend herself to these, people who were down on their luck. So that's, just part of it. So yes, here, the letters gave her insight into her mom and her grandma that she never knew, and then obviously her dad.
How has the relationship between you and Melody developed, or has it developed at all as a result of this?
Oh, sure. Yeah. No, we've become very close. Text each other, I'd say every couple days,
Oh, wow.
for sure. Yep. So we call each other sis, and
Oh, great.
yeah, it's been sweet. We kid around because I was born during their epistolary relationship. My mom and Bob used to refer to me as Princess Susan, and so. And I'm so not a princess, but anyway, we joke about it now because growing up, she would hear about this Princess Susan when they, exchanged Christmas cards for the 15 years post-war. So she heard about Princess Susan, and now, of course, we know each other. So sometimes I'll kid around and be like, well, but I'm a princess, so I'm not out there cleaning up the garage. But yeah, so we have some fun, and it's been tough because it has been healing, and some of this and some of these podcasts and articles and whatnot that we've done as a result of the book have had to, she had to go back into some areas of her life that she really didn't want to go back into. So that's been difficult too, because it's not all roses for sure. I mean, I don't go into the PTSD and his afterlife because I think there's enough books that go into that. And I didn't want to, quite honestly, I didn't want to open that door for him. So I didn't want to ask him questions about that or ask her questions about that. I wanted this to be more healing on what I already knew. I kind of had an idea based on the letters. I don't know what Pandora's box I would be opening. So, and I'm not, that's not my expertise. So I didn't want to even go
there. As a reader, I would say that you definitely showed that part, that it was there, but it was done that I didn't, like, I know it's there, but I don't need to open that chapter because there's just other things going on. I thought it was diverted really well, and it didn't detract from the story. But what I was happy about is that, again, because a lot of children don't, we'll use Richard Fitz Jr., for example. I mean, there's major parts of his father's life that he will never know about, and it has raised questions all through his life. And so I was happy that Melody got a chance to get to know her dad, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it was it was a gift from God, I believe. The way the whole thing transpired, the fact that I even had the letters down here in Tennessee with me when I happened to have my mom. So to me, if you go back and just look at the series of events that led us to where we are, I believe it was a gift from God, not only just for Melody and Bob to heal, but to bring this story out. I'll tell you, Travis, I've gotten so many emails and so many texts and so many phone calls from veterans who feel so, I don't want to say this is like a magical pill and it healed them, but they just felt they could relate to Bob. And many of them have said that they had tears at the end. And it was just very, it was a good read for them. And I feel really honored, that I believe God chose me to bring this to light. And I feel honored because I would want nothing more. I mean, now this has changed the trajectory of my whole life, my whole career. And now I'm kind of trying to be that voice, or provide a platform for veterans to have a voice.
Yeah, and that's the last thing I want to talk about. We're winding this down. We're almost done. Is you know, all through the book, your mother's faith, Bob's faith, and your faith is present throughout the pages of the book. And me being me, I read a lot of the reviews on different sites, and there was a couple of reviews that thought that the focus on faith was just a bit too much. I disagree because without faith, you don't have a whole lot in life. And people looked at that differently back then, and people address faith differently now. But I did want to ask you: is putting the faith in the story and out there like you do? What's the reason for that?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking. And yeah, I did see that review, that person's review. And um, the other thing I think is funny is it's a nonfiction. So what part of nonfiction does he not understand? If their letters really interjected God and they were very God-centric, then of course the book is going to be God-centric. But anyway, aside from that one review, um, the reason I do it is because I firmly believe, um, I firmly believe in God and Jesus as our Lord Savior. And I think it's important to not shy away from that. I think this was absolutely dropped in my lap. The way it happened, everything happened, and there I have a whole series of God winks that have happened during the course of this writing, um, and I could share one with you. But I think this is him wanting these veterans to heal, wanting them to give them an opportunity, and so therefore I'm not shying away from it. I am nothing without him, and so I am unapologetically not shying away from it, and it's going to offend some people, but so be it. Can't control that.
Well, never thought of it as unauthentic. I never thought of it as being unreal. Faith was looked at differently back then. You can definitely tell through the letters that Bob was Protestant and had his belief system. Your mom was Catholic, had her belief system, but still they all understood their faith, and it was embedded in interwoven into their lives. I mean, there were several times where Bob is saying, hey, I almost got killed today, but for the grace of God, so to speak. I'm paraphrasing here.
Yeah.
So I'm like somebody here, and then your testimony leads me to believe that your faith is not just something that is put in there for filler. It's a part of who you are.
Without a doubt, with every breath I take. Absolutely. And I don't know, in the first podcast, I forget, did we talk about Missouri, the God wink behind Missouri?
Not really, no.
Okay, so if I have time,
Yeah,
do
yeah,
we
yeah.
have time for? Okay,
We got
so,
time.
okay, cool. So here's one of these God winks that I talk about, and there's
Now,
so
wait a minute,
many.
hold on. For the uneducated here, and even I had to like God wink.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Well, this is a term coined by Squire Rushnell, God wink, and it's kind of the idea that it's not coincidence. It's a God wink. God, this is like God winking, saying, "Okay, I'm making this
Okay.
happen. Yeah, this is me. I'm here. I am, and this is a
Okay.
gift.
All right.
This is a gift from me to you." So, um, anyway, so I'm writing the book, I'm rereading the letters and the articles that Bob had included with the letters. And I come across this one letter of an operation he had just been on. And in the letter, in the article, they quote the platoon sergeant as Billy R. Dansby from Hendersonville, Tennessee. Well, I had just moved to Gallatin, Tennessee, which is a mile away from Hendersonville, Tennessee. And I thought, wow, okay, so it caught my eye. And I said, oh, let me see if he's still around. So I Google and I find a William Ray Dansby, about the age I would suspect him to be, still in Tennessee. And so I said, it's got to be him. It's got to be. So I write him a letter. I give him, I make a copy of the article, and I say, hey, I'm doing this cool thing for our Vietnam veterans. My mom used to write to this one gentleman, Bob Johnson. I'm wondering if you knew him and if this is you quoted in this article. Well, he calls back on the way back from the mailbox. He had already opened the letter, read it, and he's leaving a message on his cell phone to me. Susan, just like a drill sergeant. Susan, this is Billy Ray Dansby of the 2nd 7 Cal. And if this is the Bob Johnson I think you're referring to him, I know him very well, and I very much look forward to talking to you. Boom. And I was just like, okay, all right, well, looks like it's him. It's a win. I found him. So anyway, we have since become fast friends, and he has welcomed me into this amazing group of Vietnam veterans that meet once a month, just over the border in Alabama. And so I've got to know and love so many of them. And anyway, so in one of our visits, he says, "Did he ever tell you about Missouri?" And I said, "No." I said, "The only thing I know about Missouri is in one of his letters, he was going to Missouri, the state of Missouri, to visit with parents of one of his men who had perished, and that he was a fine soldier. That's all I knew." Well, Bill says, "That makes sense." And I said, "No, why? Tell me more." And so he goes on to tell me that Missouri was this young kid drafted right out of high school, really had no business being in the war. He just didn't have that mindset, that grit. And so Bob could see that and took him under his wing and felt like he was there to protect Missouri. And Bob had this very unrealistic view that he was supposed to protect everybody and all the South Vietnamese children. He was to protect everybody. So he really felt it when we lost anybody. But anyway, he especially thought he was to protect Missouri, and he did in many situations. But his last moment, Missouri's last moment, was not very pretty. It was awful, in fact, and Bob witnessed it, and Bob was the leader of this little cadre that was going out on reconnaissance. So he always felt guilty, that survivor's guilt. And that ended up being the pivotal moment in Bob's psyche with this Vietnam War. So it was a God wink that I, had this Bill Dansby, and he's still with us, and he was willing to talk, and that I was able to develop this, relationship equity where he felt, trustworthy, that I was trustworthy to talk to me and to let me in on that whole story, because that was pivotal, as you see in the book. That was pivotal in this book, and I wouldn't have had that otherwise. So that's one of these God winks that I say, God, really, this is him. I'm just an instrument. I'm just a workhorse for him. And so he wants these veterans to have an opportunity to heal and to be at peace before they come home. And that's why I'm so grateful for you for spreading, the awareness of this story. And I really am sincerely grateful that you share it, because I see that you share it as well to other groups. And I think it's good vibes. It's healing. And I do think a lot of people, once they read it, they do feel compelled to help out. And I hope that continues, because the more veterans that, especially our Vietnam veterans, and I love all veterans. Okay, I love all veterans, and
Well,
I
yeah,
respect all of
absolutely.
I have heartstrings to the Vietnam veterans.
Absolutely. It kind of came into focus, as I was going through Memorial Day with Richard Fitz Jr. and his family. In the back of my mind was, your story and Bob. And, I think you promised, I think I promised that with what we have, we're going to make sure they're never forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're all about. So I just glad we got the opportunity to talk again. There was a lot there, and I'm probably going to read it through a third time and might have some follow-ups. And definitely looking forward, if you get back to Scituate, or I go out to Nashville, I go out there a lot, that we can meet up sometime. So
absolutely. Yep, absolutely.
the book is 77 Letters, written by Susan P. Hunter. You can go to Susan Hunter Books. Yeah,
yep,
Susan Hunter Books. I got that right. Susan Hunter Books. You can find out all about it. And again, a really great book. Whether you served or not, whether you just have interest in the Vietnam War or not, I encourage you to read it. Well, Susan, all good things come to an end, but the story is not over, as you say in writing. And I appreciate your time.
This is true. No, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, just saying, Oscar Mike Radio, we are Mission Flight. Susan, again, thank you very much. We are out.